agenda for our next meeting, which will be the 2nd of February. We're meeting remotely, and tonight's meeting is being broadcast on YouTube for those that are watching live, but it will also be recorded for anybody to watch at their leisure. Tonight we have a number of items that are for decision only, and therefore we are able to meet remotely. However, should there be any recommendations that require an action, those recommendations will go to the Chief Operating Officer for final sign-off and for actioning. We have one apology this evening, and that is Councillor Carr, and there is no substitute. So we shall now move to the agenda proper, and the first item is declarations of interest. Do any members have any declaration that is not already recorded? No, fantastic, thank you. So we will then move to the minutes, and that is to approve and sign the minutes of the meeting held on, firstly, the 16th of November. Do any members have any issues that they wish to raise in respect of the minutes of the meeting of the 16th of November? Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a typo, but it does affect the context of the sentence concerned, which is on page 6, the second full paragraph down, where it says it was confirmed by officers that current consultation at Haxby Hall, says were, it should have been was, not expected to effect the delivery of the expected services. Now, effect means to carry out with an E, whereas what they really mean is it won't affect the delivery. So I think that is very critical that we change that, because not to do so would leave the wrong expression, in my view.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out, and I'm sure that will get corrected. Are there any other comments in respect of the agenda item of the 16th of November? If not, we will, with that correction, we will sign that off, and I will sign those at a time when I am next available physically in West offices. The second agenda minutes are the meeting of the 1st of December. And I see Councillor Webb has got an issue to raise in respect of those minutes. Councillor Webb.
Thank you. Yeah, it's not a correction with the minutes. It's just asking a question about them, really. Page 14 in the resolved section, the third dotty I point number 3, officers to inquire with the LGA about sharing questions raised by the LGA to officers with members of the committee via email. Did we get that, or was there a problem with receiving it? Just an update.
No, Chair, it's not been circulated yet because the LGA are considering the committee's request and are going to get back to me, and the peer review team won't meeting until later this month. So they are aware of it, so I'm just waiting for their response.
Thank you. And that comment was from our monitoring officer. We do have a number of officers that are going to be joining us for various agenda items. Could I ask those officers, when they do first speak, if they could give their name and their job title? That would be incredibly helpful for those watching. So if there are no other corrections or comments in respect of the agenda item of the meeting of the 1st of December, again, I will sign that at the next available opportunity. So we then move to agenda item 3, which is public participation. We have 2 members of the public who wish to address us. The first is Mr. Andy Mendes, and he will be joining us remotely. over the telephone. Mr. Mendes, are you there?
Once again, Michael, I am.
Marvellous. That's fantastic. Always a pleasure to see you. Well, to hear you on this occasion.
It says here.
You know the procedure. You have 3 minutes to address us on items within the remit of this committee, and please start whenever you like. I will give you a 30-second countdown.
So hello again, everybody. Firstly, on the Constitution, I just want formally to notify you that I have sent a paper to the statutory officers, the Chair and the Vice Chair, analysing the current inconsistencies and omissions in the proposed Constitution concerning the treatment of independent members on council committees.
Mr. Mendes, Andy, can I just stop you? I'm struggling to hear you.
Right.
I don't know if anybody else is, but I'm struggling to hear you. I can see a couple of people are. Could you speak up if that's at all possible?
I'll rewind. Is that better?
Yeah, that's much better. Thank you.
I never quite know where to put this phone in order to make it work. Apologies. I will start again.
Do you want to start again?
Okay. I'd love to.
Please do.
Yeah, as long as you don't dot me time.
I haven't.
Okay, right. So once more, hello. And firstly, on the Constitution, I just want formally to notify you that I've sent a paper to the statutory officers, the Chair and the Vice Chair, analysing the current inconsistencies and omissions in the proposed Constitution concerning the treatment of independent members on council committees. I have suggested a rationalisation and standardisation of terms of office and of the appointment procedures under the overall scrutiny of joint standards. That's just for notice, if you like. So to today's business, on the audit plan, I think the challenge of reviewing the audit plan is always in spotting the gaps. So I've had a go. First, I don't see any direct reference to TCOL companies in the 2022-23 overview. Given the scale of work now going through TCOL businesses and the recent damning report on Make It York, should A&G insist on this being given a serious review, perhaps looking not only at performance, but especially their governance and controls? Maybe A&G should first ask directly for the clear overview of all current TCOL companies so that you're better informed of potential risks and exposures and can then adjust the audit work accordingly. For me, it's surprising not to see absence management appearing here. The last audit was carried out pre-COVID and reported without opinion in July 2021. It might be good to look again as work patterns hopefully return to normal and to see if the new procedures are properly embedded and cost-effective now. Next point, I thought Veritar were newly charged with an annual review of settlements. It's not on their plan, but I wonder if this is implicit in the April work plan item from the new head of HR. Finally, on audit plan, I said in October that I was disturbed to read that changes to priorities and audit work are now being determined by Veritar in conjunction with officers, presumably GRAG, with A&G being helped to understand which audits are being undertaken. It seems that remains the plan. How can A&G take back control, please? With any internal audit function, it is perhaps inevitably close to marking one's own homework. Now it seems that the proposal is to set the questions too. Doesn't seem to me to be healthy. Last comment on the audit reports. I guess you may talk about commercial waste this evening. I'm not sure whether it's a Veritar role, but note that to my knowledge over the last 7 years, many service areas have blamed lack of systems or the use of spreadsheets on audit failures.
30 seconds.
See also the continuing healthcare audit today. Would it help A&G to see a register of systems in use by each function, and especially in this context, whether they are integrated to the finance systems? And should this then inform the audit plan? And finally, it's unhelpful that Appendix E, follow-up of agreed audit actions, doesn't tell you which actions have not been completed. There's therefore no way for the committee to see and comment on specific concerns. Rather, you're asked to take the generic reassurance that the delays will not lead to unacceptable exposure to risk. That's me done. As always, I look forward to the discussions and finally to seeing the revised Constitution. Cheers.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you very much indeed. And I'm sure we will make reference to the points you've raised.
Right.
Our second and final speaker is Gwen Swinburne. Are you there, Gwen?
I am, Chair. Can you hear me?
Perfectly. Yes, that's much clearer.
Oh, good.
So again, you have issues to raise within the remit of this committee. You have 3 minutes. Start whenever you'd like.
Thank you, Chair. Happy New Year to everybody, and thanks for turning out on a Friday evening. That's not good. Today we sit at yet another unlawful remote meeting and are faced with what arguably is the worst internal audit among many I have ever seen, and knowing it will have been glossed up for public consumption makes it worse. The fact that the internal auditors have the cheek to even suggest the commercial waste audit is limited assurance should be sufficient for you to demand an independent review of the audit business, which, in our ownership, brings only disbenefits, in my view. Members, I request these 3 audits, continuing health, business continuity, and commercial waste, are each referred to their scrutiny committees and the exec members responsible, and you require a report back and action plan within 3 months. These each represent long-standing absolute failures from multiple chief officers, and I might say auditors too. How could this lot have been allowed to happen? We all know you are being incrementally marginalised regarding internal audit. Whilst you have responsibility, the staff and auditors continually and increasingly deny you the tools to exercise strategic control. As shown here today, matters are now completely out of hand and you need to take back control. This includes a full appraisal of all audits done and those not done in the last 5 years. An audit clerk could prepare such a resource in a day. The fact packet annual audit plan, again with zero rationale, metrics, prioritization or history on your agenda today, exposes you to further difficulties in the future. Why do you not demand proper baseline metrics, prioritization and risk assessment for your annual internal audit plan? Chair, please don't let the horrors in this commercial waste audit distract you from the possible unimaginable problems from the feeble business continuity plan. After the flood, I would have expected business continuity to be top class, but no. May I propose an annual audit report on the business continuity planning? Thank you, Chair. May I propose an annual report on the business continuity planning to this committee and all use the same templates for coordination and monitoring? Clearly, this shouldn't need to be said. Finally, Chair, I am aware that there has been no public consultation on the draft budget, and again the Council appears in breach of its statutory duty to consult with the business ratepayers. I know I keep sounding like an old record, but it happens every year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, and I'm sure many of those points will be definitely raised this evening.
Thank you, Chair. Have a good.
Thank you. And that's the end of the public participation session of this evening's meeting. We now move to the substantive agenda items, and I can't recall if I said at the beginning of the meeting that I intend to take them slightly out of order, and we will therefore be covering these agenda items in this order. Agenda item 4, agenda item 5, agenda item 8, and then agenda items 6, 7 and 9. And that's in order for the external officers and those that are joining us for just one agenda item can have their issues resolved at the beginning part of the meeting. So we move to agenda item 4, which is monitor 3, the key corporate risks, and I believe we have Sarah Kirby introducing this item. And hello, Sarah.
Hello. Yes, so thank you, Chair. So I'm Sarah Kirby. I'm the Principal Accountant in Corporate Finance. And yes, I'm here today to present KCR Monitor 3, which also includes a detailed analysis of KCR 12, which is our response to major incidents. And there are other colleagues present today that have helped to bring together the information on KCR 12. That's Steve Ball from Emergency Planning and Fiona Phillips from Public Health. So they're available for questions later. And also, it's quite good timing because Councillor Webb asked about business continuity planning at the last meeting, and so we can have a discussion about that today. So there aren't any major changes. There's no new risks, none of the change in scores. Paragraph 16 to 23 just covers the details of what's changed. So really quickly, I'll just go through those. So we've considered the impact of the inflation rate and the impact that will have on financial pressures, the capital programme, and our response to major incidents. On KCR2 governance, there's just some updates to some of the timings and actions to do with the ongoing review of the Constitution. On local plan KCR8, I've just added something there in the control, just so we don't have to constantly update that with specifics, but just to put something in there that recognises that there's all information on the website which gives up-to-date information on where the local plan is at. Got some new controls in communities and some new risks in workforce around recruitment and potential strike action. And KCR 12, as is often the case when we look at this in detail, has got quite a few new mitigations in there. So I'll just let you ask me any questions on those. But just before we go to that, just the other thing to note is in recommendations, we've got a new recommendation there, which is just to note that we're not planning on doing any further detailed analysis, so no further Annex Bs. Now we've got to the end of the cycle of looking at all of those, so we'll just go back to doing sort of ordinary KCR reports at the next meeting. So I'll just open that to questions now.
Thank you. Yes, I was going to flag that up. We have now covered all 12 of the KCRs during our time as a committee. And thank you, Sarah, for all the work that you've done in putting those very detailed reports together for us. They've been incredibly helpful. So before we go on to the annex, do any members have any questions that they'd like to raise in respect of the report with Sarah? Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this is more just a point to flag, really. On page 20 at the bottom there about governance, KCR 2. You know, we've talked about code of conduct, we talked about conflict of interest, and that's been put in there. And I think, you know, this might fit somewhere else, I'm not sure. But in terms of governance, one thing that I think as a councillor, and I doubt I'm alone here, we've noticed is that scrutiny has for various reasons had sort of less and less resource, less and less funding over time. And I think it's potentially leading to things. I mean, one of the public speakers suggested that we take the waste management audit and take that to scrutiny and said bring it back in 3 months. I think right now that would be impossible, and I can see that therefore leading to potential risks further down the line, and that's just one example. And I wonder how we build that in, where that fits. So yeah, anything you can do about that.
I think it's a really important question, and I'm going to ask both Janie and Debbie Mitchell, who's our finance officer, about resource. I suspect this falls more into Janie's bracket than Debbie's, but the resourcing of scrutiny committees and the work that scrutiny officers do.
Chair. I'm
Thank you.
Janie Berry. I'm the Council's Director of Governance and Monitoring Officer. There is currently a restructure being planned in respect of democratic services, and one of the aims of that is to address the resourcing and support provided to the council scrutiny function. I'm not able to go into more details about that in this meeting, and the plans are still being finalised, and they do need the approval of the Chief Operating Officer and Head of HR before they can go any further. In respect of financial support to support work programmes, for example, that remains the same, it's unchanged. So I think there is a budget allocated for scrutiny to support work programmes and member development, and that, as far as I'm aware, remains unchanged at this moment in time. In terms of the operation of the scrutiny function, there is a scrutiny chairs forum or meeting coming up, and those are chaired by Councillor Crawshaw. Councillor Crawshaw is always keen to take on board any views around the council scrutiny function, and he has invested alongside Councillor Fenton quite significant time in reviewing the council's overview and scrutiny function, and those procedures are outlined in the revised draft constitution, which has now been published. But I suggest, in terms of the mechanics of scrutiny itself and the creation of the work programme across all of the scrutiny committees, that is dealt with by the scrutiny chairs in their forum meeting, and also with Councillor Crawshaw and Councillor Fenton.
Thank you. Yeah, you do have a supplementary, I suspected as much. Councillor Webb.
Yeah, no, sorry. I mean, I don't want to make this an argument, but I was more thinking about, you know, that this is a risk that we're not capable of, you know, whether we're marking our own homework or marking someone else's homework. At the minute, we're just not marking any homework. And I think that's something that scrutiny really does well. And I just wondered if it's not, I might have missed it, but it's not sort of outlined as a risk. And in my opinion, I feel like it is, because I think that, you know, it can lead to poor decision and poor judgment, and also a lack of learning after something's gone wrong. So it's just more of a to flag it up. I think where we are right now, Janie, and I appreciate what you're saying, that hopefully things are going to improve, but I think until we see that, and even if we do, it's probably going to be a year before we really see that embedded. So it was just a suggestion as to something that might fit in, but yeah, thank you.
Can I suggest, therefore, that we ask Debbie and Sarah Kirby, who helped put the risk register together, to give that some consideration and perhaps comment back before the next set of minutes get published?
Yes, that's fine.
Lovely. If there aren't any questions, therefore, on the report, can I ask, therefore, that we move to the annex, which is in relation to major incidents, which is, and correct me if I'm wrong, we haven't looked at it was public health where we that we looked at just before the pandemic.
Yes.
So I'm hoping that by looking at major incidents, we're not tempting fate in the same way that we did in 2019. So I shall hand over again to you, Sarah, and I don't know if you wish to introduce any colleagues at this opportunity.
Yes, so as I said, this annex was put together by Steve Ball from Emergency Planning, with the help of input from other colleagues as well, and particularly public health colleagues. So Fiona Phillips is also here to answer any specific public health questions. So it's probably best to let them do any introduction, if there's anything further they want to say, and then open it to questions.
Yeah, please do. So Steve, there you go, and Fiona. Thank you, and welcome this evening. Who would like to start? Steve, I'm guessing, given that you may have done the bulk of this work.
Yeah, hi there, and thank you for inviting us here. This report was put together in relation to major incidents. I do the emergency planning for the council. and work closely with the local resilience forum in mitigating risks and allowing the response by other emergency services and partners to assist with that. So this is just an overview as to how that would fit in, and I think there's enough detail on there to give you that overview as to how we would respond. There's several documents which are perhaps not in your sort of sight lines as a normal. We do a response to major incident, a response to major and critical incidents document, which notifies all partners of anything that is likely to affect us. That's our way of warning and informing, which is one of the main problems when it comes to responding, sharing that information. We also embed our training across all our partners in relation to the response, and have a set schedule for the plans as to how they feed in both to our council and to the local resilience forum as well, to try and mitigate the risks. On the outside of that, there is the national strategic risk assessments, which give the national risks, and obviously we lay them over the top of any sort of mapping that we have for our own areas to see how any of those risks would affect us. Some of the ones that are coming up at the moment are the failure of utilities, and at the moment you'll see that it's either financial or, as we saw recently with the storms that hit in North Yorkshire but didn't really affect us, how it would affect us for loss of services and for vulnerable people who are in our communities who might be affected from loss of anything that they rely on a day-to-day basis. Outside of that is the normal sort of flooding events that we have, and working with our other major partners such as the Environment Agency, who are building the flood defences for us now to mitigate some of the risks that we have, and then evaluate what it's got from there. I think we've listed just about everything there. I appreciate there's other things like, the terrorist attacks, which are usually controlled by the police, and any risks. We look at our high risk venues that we would have anywhere around within the city of York, and try and mitigate any chance of any occurrence there, both through intelligence and through any other measures that we can put in place. This report was actually put together just before the Christmas time, and I appreciate we've referred in there about the counter-terrorism stuff that we do, and now it's more about protect and prepare, which is slightly different wording. So if you read it, just bear in mind that.
Thank you, that's really helpful. And Fiona, from a public health perspective, and I know you've made reference here to pandemics, but there are a range, and Steve's just raised a couple of them: loss of utility, loss of water, that might have a public health element. So could you just introduce yourself and talk about how public health plan for major incidents?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I'm Fiona Phillips, Assistant Director of Public Health. So, so obviously the major incident for us running has been the COVID pandemic. But as you say, we have a response for all kinds of incidences that have an impact on public health. So Steve's already outlined some of the areas which potentially will have public health consequences. So any incidents, particularly things like flooding, etc., will have a public health aspect to them. So we work closely with our colleagues in emergency planning to make sure that we give that expert public health advice into any of those forums. Outside of the kind of emergency response as well, one of the roles within public health will be to obviously monitor any illnesses or outbreaks. So outside of our structure within the City of York Council, we also work closely with what's now the UK Health Security Agency. So any kind of national threats or things that we become aware with, they do that surveillance, but we have close links with them as an agency to work closely about any threats that we may have coming our way into public health. And we also have a local health protection board as well, where those issues will be discussed.
Thank you, that's really helpful. I'm going to open it up to questions from members, but can I ask the first question about coordination? if a major incident occurs, such as a major flood or a significant fire or something that could even conceivably impact on West officers, what processes are there in place to be able to coordinate the council's response?
If I could answer that, Chair, Steve Ball again. We have set plans. We break it down in relation to the operational response, the tactical response, and the strategic response that we would have, which is sort of bronze, silver, and gold officers. We have facilities within our partner agencies where we can relocate to those, and we also have, if it had a total loss, we could obviously relocate to Hazel Court. But it would depend on if we've lost all the IT and facilities that we have. Now with our hybrid working, people are more agile as to where they are. We have lots of officers who work in different areas of the country, so you can relocate. So people who live slightly out of York, if York lost all its facilities, we might still have some sort of connectivity. If it was a major fire that burnt down West offices, then we could relocate with partners. We also, in the last 12 months, with our partners with the Local Resilience Forum, we've committed some money to North Yorkshire County Council's premises, in the fact they've got a tactical coordination centre there now, which is it's a full facility which can be used by partners either as a drop-in facility or to coordinate anything which is a serious incident. So if we had serious flooding that was in York and we couldn't access any of our facilities around York, we could relocate to that office and still provide some facility, just like we could do also by use of Wi-Fi now in most other locations. We could also do that with other partners such as the Environment Agency, who also have a control room, or the police, like we have done previously through other major floods. So there's several different contingency methods that we would have to relocate. Some of the difficulties you would have would be people maybe travelling there, and it probably would affect some of the delivery of some of the services. But we have key prioritised the services we must deliver as a priority, some of our statutory responsibilities, and obviously we'll concentrate our efforts on delivering those in the first instance, rather than some that we can do without for a couple of days. So we have got that priority system as part of our business continuity. Each service does get reviewed with business continuity each year to make sure they have a robust plan and can contact their own service members and can even tell them to relocate. And we can communicate with all of our staff to tell them to relocate through different methods. So should one fail, so different sort of text messaging or WhatsApp and different other features, so that if one fails, we can go on to the next one. So there's several different measures we could do for that. Thank
you. I see Councillor Fisher's got a question. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you very much, Steve. Chair, my question is to Steve about the involvement of town and parish councils in the emergency planning. The flooding in 2015 on Boxing Day was so catastrophic across the centre of York that my village, although it had quite severe flooding in the centre and a number of houses under threat, was not able to get any help from anywhere outside. And we had to basically try and protect property as best we could and direct traffic off our own back. Now, we then subsequently had Ruben from emergency planning come out and update our emergency plan and try and get it. Have all the village communities and parish councils been offered the chance to develop and update their emergency plans? Because obviously, as well as not only providing resources when none of those are available, it's important for parish councils to be able to support City of York officers who are going out there with, sort of accommodation, refreshments and so on. So are we working with parish councils as well?
Yeah, it's a really good question. That one of the things we are doing, yes, it's there, it's still available. We still have the community resilience programs that we can do, so the plan can still be out there, whether it's for parishes or whether it's for individual houses. There's the flood resilience group, which has been developed across the whole of Yorkshire and the Humberside, so that people can protect their own properties as well. Some of those plans we merge in with the Environment Agency. Just last month we did a training session with all of the flood wardens, where the parishes were invited, and I made sure that went out for the City of York parishes as well, and flood wardens, just to make sure that they have that connectivity. On top of that, I also now chair the community resilience group for the Local Resilience Forum, and the intention for the next 12 months is for us to try and engage more with town councils, parish councils, and the community groups that exist already, and try and make sure that we've got better connectivity between yourselves and ourselves. So it's a two-way process, because it's not about us doing everything. Some communities have become more reliant during the COVID response that they've done, you know, knocking on neighbours' doors and providing food and all that, and some are very much in control of what they like to do. But if they have any questions, it should be a case of ticking a sort of one box on the computer, and it takes you to the right place so that you can find the information you need or the help you need, or get the right template plan to make sure that you can write a plan which is meaningful to yourselves. So that is action that we're taking forward. We're hoping that the funding stream, because the way that local resilience forums have been funded has slightly changed. In fact, we were given some money last year, and now that's going to be extended for the next 3 years to try and do different project work which would never have been done previously. So that means we can actually embed that way of communicating with our own communication teams as well, but also making sure that the actual website is meaningful to everyone. And even when they go through the local government review, when everything else is changing around North Yorkshire, no matter where you live, you can click on that same one system and get the right information rather than have to search around different agencies. So we're trying to integrate the police, the fire, the Environment Agency, Yorkshire Ambulance Service, British Red Cross, all of these things all into one place, so that we can signpost people, signpost them and make it easy for them to gather that information. So yes, we can still do community resilience. If anybody needs it, they can get in touch with us, and we can make sure we give you the template to complete the plan and assist you through that process. Because a lot of it is down to you know the people who are vulnerable in your communities, and that is usually the first port of call that we'd ask for assistance.
Thank you very much indeed for that.
Can I just ask Fiona whether, from a public health perspective, parish councils are consulted, engaged with?
We haven't done so. I would say kind of previously in our routine, you know, what we were doing prior to COVID. So that's probably something we've done less. Throughout COVID, we have engaged more with parish councils, particularly when we've had, you know, we know we've had high case rates in particular communities, and we've put additional testing into areas than we have liaised with parish councils. But it's a good point, you know, as we move out of COVID and going back to routine public health work, you know, now that we've made those links, it would be something that would make sense to make sure we continue doing.
You've got a supplementary, Councillor Fisher.
It's not a supplementary, it's just a comment that you are actually doing that, because we got a notification that testing is going to be carried out in areas of Stockton on the Forest. So clearly there is some liaison with parish councils, and that's very much to be welcome. Thank you.
Good. Councillor Ware.
Thank you, Chair. My question's about, I don't know, things that potentially aren't on this report, I guess. One thing is failure of hospitals to be able to admit new patients. Not now, not when we're talking about COVID this year, but I think that, you know, given what's going on in hospitals almost every winter now, and given the huge backlog of unmet surgeries and things like that, I mean, that could become a major incident quite easily. Maybe not next winter, but the winter after, or something like that. And I was wondering, you know, how does the council know about what's going on from the NHS side of things, I suppose, is my question. And the other one, maybe Steve might be able to help more with this one, is cyber attacks on the council. If there was, you know, a major incident, a major cyber attack that basically took everything out in our systems, you know, how are we prepared to get back working as quickly as possible?
Fiona, do you want to start with the hospitals, with public health's response to a hospital major incident?
Yeah, and Steve will know about this as well, because the hospitals will link into, you know, those place-based emergency planning forums as well. But so the hospital have their own kind of escalation procedures as well. So forgive me, I can't remember what it stands for, but they have a sort of series of OPAL. So they can be, so OPAL 4 is their kind of highest level of alert. And then they obviously, after that, they can declare critical incidents as well. So if they were at the point where they couldn't accept any admissions and had real issues, then they would declare that critical incident. And similarly, they can, through the kind of emergency planning routes, put in calls for assistance, and people will be aware that, you know, various areas, particularly ambulance services, have done that recently, where they've been struggling to provide their services. So they don't kind of stand alone, as it were. So we would be aware through those place-based arrangements if any partner agencies were at that critical level of not being able to deliver service.
So there's a very streamlined, coordinated process between all the signatories of all the public sector.
Yeah, and particularly within the NHS as well. So if, you know, for example, if it were a hospital, they have partnership arrangements with other hospitals, which, you know, might, for example, lead to, you know, if York Hospital were unable to accept patients, they would have arrangements with other hospitals. So ambulances, for example, would divert to another hospital, and those arrangements would be set up in advance, and it would be a case of them declaring that and putting that into action.
And Steve, a major cyber attack that knocks out all of the systems, hopefully not coinciding with another major incident that. So yes, let's see how do the council deal with a loss of all its systems?
Yeah, it is a risk. It's a national risk which has been raised. We also know that other councils and other major industries have been hit by that, and by demands as well for cash in order to resolve the issue. At the Gold Symposium, which is for our Gold Commanders, we have a training session each year. So in December we held one, and we invited another local authority to come in who had been attacked by a cyber attack, to get some learning from them as to some of the smaller things that you maybe don't think of, and how you would address them, some of the things you have to try and overcome, and the length of time. And a lot of the issues were actually about the mental health as well as some of the staff, because they might have worked there for 30 years and they've got the lifetime of work on a computer, which then they can't access. And a lot of people do have a lot of pride in what they provide for the communities. So there's all of those factors which are consequences of a major cyber attack. The firewall system and the safety networks are a lot more robust now. There's a lot more control measures in relation to what you can and cannot have on your computers. There's ways, including training processes, that we all have to complete now for when we're logging onto the computer, making sure that we don't click on anything which is inappropriate. You know, some of the spam emails and things like that, and reporting mechanisms for those. If anything did actually manage to get through, then obviously there is disaster recovery as well, which is done by our ICT, which they could shut down servers. We also have an organisational resilience group with a local resilience forum. That's been looking at these sort of cyber attacks, and we're moving towards having an exercise for all our groups that are involved. And as part of that, we've actually now got a consultant which is working on cyber attacks and what we can do within our own groups. We've contributed a bit of the money that I mentioned earlier that was for project work. That small amount of money that we had wouldn't have resolved the issue. So we've actually partnered with the Yorkshire and Humber Resilience Forums as well, to have a project team which is going to give us something which is a bit more meaningful as to what we can do, what early features we can put in to stop something from being a cyber attack, and make sure that we don't get attacked, and how to react more quickly. As part of that, we've got the police, which is part of that group as well, which have given us some information as to the details they would ask right at the start of any sort of incident, so they can try and direct it to the National Crime Agency. And we'd also have what we call a CTAC, which is a cyber technical advice cell, which would provide us with information as to what we need to collate to be able to try and get to the perpetrators. So there's quite a bit of work going on in the background, but obviously the cleverer that the people get in relation to cyber, the cleverer we have to be as well. So we can't stand still on this one. And I can't say I'm an expert in relation to it. I'm an end user where I press a button and hope the computer works. But the specialist skills that we've had to employ now will hopefully give us a bit more confidence in the fact that what our ICT are putting in place is also then being tested, and like I said, they're going to set up a separate unit where you can test how you would react to a server when it gets attacked, even though it's not connected to anything. So our own teams will be able to get some experience as to what they would need to do should they get attacked, to try and react in a better way should it happen for real. And let's hope it never does, to be honest. And I hope that's a little bit more reassuring that, yes, we're looking at it. Yes, there is work going on. And yes, I'm sure we'll all get better and better at it the further down the line we go with the technical advice we're going to get from specialists.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands, so I would, just before I thank you and let you go, just want to ask one question about training and the business continuity plans. Are they held centrally? Are they held within each department of the council? Is there one guiding hand other than yourself that can access them all when they're required? Because it might be multiple departments of the council that need to access it. And to what extent are staff of all grades trained in major incidents?
Right. Yeah. Well, if we take that from the top, if I start off, last year we were audited in relation to business continuity, and we did hold it in a separate place. Any of the documents on Resilience Direct, which is a national network, which is separate from any of our corporate servers that we have, just in case we lose a facility. But there was an acknowledgement that not everybody could see the plans, so it was a certain amount of people could see them. It's now been put on a shared drive, so that everybody's got access to them on a shared drive and knowing the location. It's been reviewed this year, which is to try and develop everybody, because what's happened previously is emergency planning have held the plans and owned the plans as such in relation to reviewing, which is the wrong way of going about business continuity. So I've turned it on its head for this year in the fact that we're asking now that service heads will own their own plans. They'll be responsible for exercising the plans themselves and for training or giving the expectations of any members of staff as to what they need to do if they have a BC incident. And the managers will have some guidance. We're going to put, we've been trying to find a training package which would deliver the basic skills and the basic level that people would need for business continuity without having to be an expert on it. So what does it mean to people? And usually it's like, what are you going to do if a system fails? And you put it in slightly different terms. There isn't anything out there at the moment which is off the shelf that we can tap into. So we're going to develop a small training package for managers so they're aware, and that'll be each level in relation to business continuity, what's expected from you as a line manager, what's expected from you as a director, what's expected you as a member of staff, and it's knowing that basic level. And then as and when somebody joins as part of their induction, it'll be a case of they've got to understand what the basic level of business continuity action is that they would need to take for their role. And obviously, if they know that right from when they first joined us at the induction level, then they should be able to respond accordingly and report anything that is necessary as well. So all of these are going through. We're over the next couple of months, with the changing structure of the council, we're reviewing who needs a plan as to which ones are the key services we need, and if we need to redirect any staff from one service to another to provide those key services. And that might be an action that people have to do. And then from there is the reporting mechanism, so that each time something happens, any learnings we get from activations of any business continuity, the learning is captured, the plan is updated, and held centrally on that on the central drive that we have, and also copied into the Resilience Direct one that I mentioned as well, so that it's safe in a separate location, as well as the disaster recovery I mentioned earlier. It's just another option for business continuity.
That's fantastic, thank you. And given its importance, Debbie, could I ask that this does come back to committee to talk about the issues that Steve's just raised there about embedding it, about new staff, about the training package, and how that gets rolled out and implemented, say in this time next year? I think it's a worthwhile exercise continuing to look at this, given its importance to the council and its functioning. So hopefully we will get a chance to talk to you both again, and obviously it's always a pleasure talking to Sarah. So if there aren't any further questions, I'd like to thank you for attending tonight, for really interesting presentations, and thank you very much for that. And you can switch off and go about your
Can we go and open the wine now?
Yes.
Thank you.
I think we're here for a little while longer yet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we then move to agenda item 5, which is the report from the Director of Governance, the Corporate Governance Report, and we've got another officer, Lorraine, that's joining us, and I'll hand over to Jamie to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. This is a regular report that comes with an update of the work of the corporate governance team, which is managed by Lorraine and supported by Kath Murray, who is also present this evening, should members wish to ask Kath any questions. As indicated at paragraph 1.1 in the summary, we've brought a range of issues for update for members this evening, namely the outcome of the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office inspection, which took place last year, update on the performance indicators, update on the ICO published decision notices and the Ombudsman cases as well. I just want to indicate that members will have noticed at section 2 of the report that there is probably more briefer information than was expected about details of the inspection outcome. This is because without specific permission of the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office, we're not able to put into the public domain details of the letter that they sent us with the recommendations, and which is in effect their report. However, as the senior responsible officer for this process, I would like to give you some assurances from the outset, and Lorraine and Kath can go into slightly more detail if you wish. So I'm the senior responsible officer with oversight and strategic responsibility for the council's investigatory powers, and by this means surveillance, which is Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, which is covert surveillance, and there are various forms of which we undertake that. Is extremely heavily legislated for because it is primarily focused at counter-terrorism work undertaken by the police, etc. Because as you can imagine, it's like private investigation work, etc. I'd like to confirm to members this evening that the council is an extremely low user of this. In fact, applications are rare. And there is also some requirements for it. Within the time of my joining City of York Council, the function of management oversight of the council's RIPA, Regulation of Investigatory Powers activity, has transferred back in-house from Verito to the corporate governance team with my oversight. There is currently work in progress in terms of updating our policies and procedures, and in accordance with the legislation, there is required by this committee an annual review or fit for purpose test of the policy, the overarching policy that we have. I'm also required by legislation to bring a quarterly update as to the usage of this policy in terms of the applications made, etc., or the applications declined, and I'm required to bring that even if it's a 0 return. So I'm still required to do that. I'd just like to give give a sort of a bit of a process update. We've introduced gatekeeping to support all named authorised officers across the council, and we're required to provide regular training as well. Even though we are a very, very low or minimal user of this process, we are still required to ensure that key officers such as trading standards are kept appraised of legislation. I am looking at overviewing the training programme. I am pleased to advise members that a significant number of officers, including the Chief Operating Officer, have attended mandatory training in respect of the processes which are required. The Chief Operating Officer is required to attend training in respect of these procedures. We have put an action plan in place in terms of the training going forward, which would be specific for example, trading standards officers in terms of planning surveillance work, undertaking it, helping complete an application form, and also putting a gatekeeping process in, which is like a check and balance function. Ultimately, the applications that we received are determined by the Magistrates Court, and they're not decisions which are made internally. We just undertake the process and they are subject to judicial challenge. The applications are time limited as well, and we also have to have a cancellation procedure and various other procedures which are sort of like, again, quite onerous tick boxes, but they're there for an absolute required reason around any material that is obtained, the safety of that, how it's secured, how it's destroyed, how it's utilised, etc., and how it's kept safe throughout the duration that we actually physically hold that material. This also procedures also cover social media investigations, they cover test purchasing procedures, and so it's not just your stereotypical perception of private detective or a secret camera located somewhere or equivalent of kind of a covert CCTV type arrangement. So it is very wide ranging. I'm working very closely with Lorraine and Kath, who is a deputy for these purposes, because we've added additional resilience in. And once we've updated the policy, Chair, I will be returning back with the policy back for its annual fit for purpose test, and then hopefully it can be included in future work plans to ensure that we don't miss it off the radar. Chair, that's my update on that. If I just hand over to Lorraine in respect of the other elements of the report, and obviously at the end of that, we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Hello, good evening. My name is Lorraine Lunt. I'm the Council's Data Protection Officer and Corporate Governance Manager, with expertise and support from Kath Murray, who's also here tonight. So the other items on the corporate governance report include the corporate governance performance indicators. However, you will have noticed that you don't have the usual tables and charts this time. That's unfortunately a clash of publication and availability dates. So the information goes on to the York Open Data Platform as of yesterday, the 20th of January. And unfortunately, that was after the required date of submitting this report for publication. So you can see the up-to-date figures on York Open Data Platform. However, just to give you a really quick overview as a verbal update, if that's permissible, both in complaints and in FOIs, EIRs and SARs, in-time performance in Q3 of 2021 and 22, we have made and continue to make improvements on that in-time performance figure. That's reflected in all levels of the new 4Cs complaints procedures and across both FOIs, EIRs and SARs. So that's a significant achievement for the team and the council service areas that support us in providing those responses in time. The other bit of the report from today is that there has been no published decision notices in the from the ICO, so the Information Commissioning Officer, since our last report in October and December 2021. You will find Annex One, the local government and social care ombudsman decisions from the last report to committee in October. So these cover up until the most recent one, which was at the end of December 31st, 31st of December. Of the 12 cases in the annex, 6 were closed by the Ombudsman after their initial inquiries as either out of their jurisdiction, so not a process or a procedure that they could look at, or that they'd already identified that no further action was needed. In the other 6 cases that were upheld, 5 did have recommendations and or remedies for the council to provide the complainant, but 1 had no further action where the council had already taken the and offered the proportionate remedy as per the Ombudsman's decision. So it is a much shorter report and not as many details and annexes this time. However, over to committee for any questions.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, Janie. I've got Councillors Webb and then Councillor Lomas. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully this is a quick one, Janie. On the overall findings from the inspection, I know you've said you can't publish those details yet. I mean, it is quite worrying. There remains 1 area of non-compliance, 2 other recommendations for discharge, great, but several observations to improve performance were made. Could you just get some clarification as to when this will come before committee, and will we get the actual letter itself?
Chair, I can't give a guaranteed commitment that the report itself will come before the chair, because that is a decision that is made by the investigator's office, totally independent of City of York Council.
You have requested it, I understand.
We have requested it, but we haven't received their opinion as yet. So I'm afraid I can't give a guaranteed commitment to the committee at this point in time, because it's not my commitment to give at the moment. But we have asked, and obviously I'll keep you, Chair and Vice Chair, updated on the response that we receive. In terms of the outstanding recommendation that was followed, it was wording to be amended in the procedure to reflect a legislative change. So that occurred between 2018 and the inspection in 2021. And in that time, there was the transition of the service that came back into house. There's been various staff changes as well, including monitoring officers who normally have the oversight of these procedures. And in terms of the various recommendations, that is linked with the delivery of an action plan that I've put in place, which is around introduction of gatekeepers, is around the provision of more extensive training, much more focused training as well, for example, in trading standards, and also a commitment to resolve the recommendation that is outstanding as well. I've also committed to a complete review of the procedure, and there is a commitment in there as part of the action plan that the quarterly updates come before yourself, and also the annual fitness for purpose test of the policy, which has not previously happened.
Thank you. But as there's no, as that's an internal document, there's no reason why that couldn't be shared with the committee the next time you do.
So I will. At the moment, the action plan does contain specific details because it's an internal document for us. So I would just have to redact some of the references at the moment in the absence of the permission of the inspectorate.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lomas, and then I've got Councillor Mason. Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted, I'm in the same paragraph 2.3 on page 60, and I just wondered, you've mentioned that you're undertaking the work to meet the outstanding recommendation, and you say and observations. Does that mean that all of the observations to improve performance are going to be part of that action plan that you've referenced?
Some of the observations are part of that action plan as well. Some of the observations are, as I said, the commitment around making sure that this committee does the annual fitness for purpose test, which has not previously happened, and also making sure that you receive the quarterly update as well, which has also not previously happened. An update has been provided to an executive member, but my professional opinion is that it's this committee that should receive the quarterly information, and because you have got the governance responsibility across all council services, so it's not the executive member. And so those are the commitments that I've given. Overall, the inspection was actually, whilst it doesn't sound it, was actually helpful because it was only a recent transition in. Lorraine, myself and Kath are new hosts, if you like, of the entire procedure. So we've owned it for a very short period of time before the inspection and shaped it and undertaking the review of the policy. So some elements of the policy we couldn't finalise until we'd received the inspector's outcomes.
Thank you. Lorraine, did I see you put your hand up? Do you want to add anything to Councillor Lomas's question?
It was just to reiterate and give committee any comfort or confidence in the outstanding recommendation from 2018 to this report, is that it was not over an area of non-compliance or failure to adhere to the requirements of the legislation. It was regarding to provide a clearer statement or indication comment on a particular type of application made through RIPA and the covert surveillance legislation. So it was purely around attaching in a part of the process a clearer indication statement from the applying or authorising officer. It was not a piece of legislation or part of the legislative requirements that we were not complying with.
Thank you. Is that okay, Councillor Lomas? Councillor Mason, you're next.
Thanks, Chair. Page 65, Lorraine, there's obviously the summary of all the cases from the Ombudsman, and there's one, third one down, that obviously says it can't even be summarised because it would be so obvious, or it's kind of giving that impression. I've never seen it before. I just wondered what type of things can't be summarised without, in a kind of way that, wouldn't break people's confidentiality or whatever else.
Hello there. It's a direct instruction from the LGSCO, the Ombudsman themselves. They have chosen as well not to publish even an anonymised decision on this particular case that was raised to them. And we're following their directions that we are not to publish any details of that case, as the contents may risk identifying people involved.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Mason?
Does the person get any say over that, or is that a direction? Could they say, actually, I'm happy for it to be published? Or
if the individual complainant wants to make any of their own personal data or information publicly available, that's entirely up to them, but we have to follow the regulator's instructions.
Sorry, I mean, does the regulator ask the person, we don't think we should publish this because it will identify you? What's your thoughts?
I couldn't answer that, in all honesty, okay, Councillor Mason, on what their process is for determining what they will disclose publicly or not with the individual complainants, as that's their procedures. I could ask them and or find out where we could get that question answered for you and report back. I just suppose the scenario would be that it's something that a person complains about and thinks it's in the public interest, and they think it is something that should be published, but the ICO, or not the ICO, whoever it is, the Ombudsman thinks it isn't because it would identify them, but whose call is that, basically? That's what I was interested to find out. And it may not be that the outcome of the complaint or the individual's complaint may not be in the public interest. It may be very personal, etc. Yeah. However, we will take it away, and I'll get you a link to where you can find that information, or unless Kath has anything further to add to my response.
Kath Murray.
Hi, it's Kath Murray. I'm fairly certain that they will have been made aware. We can check that for definite. But what tends to happen with Ombudsman decisions is that the parties involved have a draft decision so that they can add any further comments to that. And then you get a final decision statement with a covering letter. And I certainly know that in our covering letter, that's what was explained. So I'm fairly certain it will have been explained also to the individual. And should they have felt that wasn't appropriate, they would have been able to go back and explain that. That would be my expectation, but we can confirm that for definite.
Just to say, Chair, as well, I'm going to have to go use the bathroom in a minute.
Yes, we're going to have a break as soon as we finish. I mean, go, but by all means, go now. I'm not saying you have to hang on. Thank you. Just before the meeting started, Lorraine, another member who's read the papers wrote to myself and a number of other members of A&G who may not have seen this, to state that one of the findings that you've covered, one on page 67, The action that was stated had happened hadn't actually happened. The apology made and payment arranged. Apparently no apology was issued to that individual. I will contact you separately after the meeting just to ask for some clarification on that. Okay, if there aren't any further questions, and before we move to the next agenda item, can I suggest that we have a short break? It's now 18:41 according to my computer. Should we reconvene at 18:50? Does that sound satisfactory to everybody? Yeah, 18:50. So those watching on the screen will see a holding screen, and we will rejoin you shortly. And that's the holding screen. Thank you, everybody, and welcome back. So we're now, as discussed earlier, moving to agenda item 8, which is the Audit and Counter Fraud Progress Report. I'd like to introduce Max Thomas. If you'd like to start and introduce the report and explain why one of the audits we're going to be looking at in rather more detail. Max, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Max Thomas. I'm from Verito, which is the Council's shared service. I'm also the Council's head of internal audit. So for this report, this is our regular report where we provide details of internal audit and counter fraud work completed. It's actually the work that's been completed since the October meeting of the committee. Annex One lists the audits which are currently underway and the reports that have been issued in the period. 3 reports have been finalised, and one of those reports on commercial waste was given a limited assurance opinion. So the report itself is attached as Annex 3 to the report. I think with this audit, it's worth noting that a number of the issues identified were as a result of changes in service delivery that occurred as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The relevant managers have accepted the findings from the audit, and an action plan has been agreed, which we believe will address the issues that we identified. James Gilchrist and Ben Grabham are here tonight with us if the committee does want to discuss the progress that has been made by the service in implementing the agreed actions further. Within Annex One, we also provide details of the audit work we're currently doing, the work that we're planning to do next and later. And we also provide a summary of the follow-up testing that we've undertaken. So that's the testing to ensure that other agreed audit actions are being implemented in line with the agreed dates for those actions. Finally, Annex 2 summarises the counter fraud work and other related activities we've undertaken in the period, as well as the outcomes from that work. So very happy to take questions on the report.
Thank you very much. And can I ask members, before we go to James Gilchrist and Ben Grabham, are there any queries that you'd like to raise on appendices A and B, the internal audit work that's either ongoing in planning or has been completed, and Appendix B, which are the current priorities for internal audit work? Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. On Appendix 1, on page 126, 127, could you just sort of, it might be something I'm missing, but why was no opinion given on absence management and Danesgate follow-up audit? And then while I'm at it, on page 129, which is in the second appendix, there's a significant risk area around education healthcare plans, SEND, which are related to children. I was just wondering if you could outline a little bit more about what exactly the significant risk areas are. Is it just in general it's a risk, or why have we deemed it as a significant risk area? So just on those 2 areas would be great.
Max.
Okay, so the 2 audits where it says no opinion has been given, that's simply because they weren't full assurance audits, so we weren't looking at the scope of the audit was relatively limited. So for Danesgate, it was a follow-up of particular issues, and the same for absence management. So we're not in a position then to provide an overall opinion, or if we did provide an opinion, it would be potentially misleading. So that's why we don't provide an opinion. In terms of the audit on special educational needs and disability send provision, that's simply, those are issues that have been highlighted by management. They're areas that we've agreed to look at further to support management sort of address those issues. But I can provide more details perhaps outside the meeting on the specifics, if you like.
Councillor Webb.
Yeah, very briefly on the first one, then on the absence management. I know that's been an ongoing concern, and could we clarify? So obviously this was not big enough to warrant an opinion. Have we done that? Have I just forgotten it, or is that in the pipeline for the future?
Well, we might pick this up under the consultation on next year's plan.
Yeah,
but
I thought you would, yeah, but I thought I'd mention it now before I forget.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll come to it then in that case. Well, I have a follow-up question before I go to Councillor Fisher. You've marked SEND as a do next as opposed to category 1 do now. I'm just concerned that if it is such a significant risk area, and that it has been highlighted by managers that this should be done, why is that not a category 1 to do immediately?
Well, that's when we say do next, that's simply the sort of scheduling of the work. So that particular audit, we are discussing the exact scope of the audit. It will be done within, the field work will start within the next matter of weeks. So it's not something we're putting off. It's next in the pipeline.
Yeah, I did follow it up because I thought this might get raised, and I understand it's about to start in March. Is that
that's
right?
That
your understanding?
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope that's okay, Councillor Webb. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. It's just something for the benefit of members. Is there an overall document somewhere on York Open Government or somewhere in the system that has all the service areas of the council, the date they were last audited, the level of audit, and the risk level of, priority level of each audit area? So I think sometimes that could be very, very useful to us to refer to, just to check that we aren't, as members, aren't missing significant audits which we think ought to be done. For example, if something was last audited in 2017 and got reasonable assurance, should that come up, should we know that so we can bring it back up again for audit, flag it up?
Okay, we don't publish that sort of schedule, but clearly through these progress reports, we are, through these progress reports and the annual report, we are listing all the audits we've done over time and the opinions given on those. So that information is there. We can collate it so that members we can see, when we last looked at a particular area. Having said that, just because an audit hasn't been done for some time doesn't mean that it's necessarily significantly more risky and therefore needs to be done again. We are very much moving away from a sort of cyclical type of audit plan, because the danger there is you spend time auditing areas which aren't actually that risky. It's better to concentrate on what we regard, what the organisation, what the audit committee regard as the high risk priority areas.
Is that okay, Councillor Fisher?
Yeah.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions on page 129. There are 3 schools identified, provides broader assurance, identified in discussions with management. Are they in relation to specific concerns that those managers have raised relating to those schools?
I would have to check on that. I'm not aware of any particular concerns.
I'm just surprised, therefore, that they're in category 1 do now, as that they're urgent, as opposed to issues like do later, public health, or Section 106 agreements. It's about the prioritisation and how do you decide which issues, which audits fall into which category?
Yeah, just because an audit's in category 1, it doesn't mean it's more important than, say, an audit in category 2. It's simply the timing of the work.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'd need to check on those particular schools. As I say, I'm not aware of particular concerns, but clearly we do try to do some limited school audit, or a limited number of school audits each year, just to provide assurance that the sort of risks within those schools have been properly managed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. If there aren't any further questions, I would therefore just like Max to introduce the commercial waste audit and what your auditors identified. It's all written down, but I just think if you can give us a précis of those, and then we will discuss those in a rather more detail, hopefully, with James Gilchrist and with Ben Grabham. Max.
Okay, I mean, as you say, the report's presented. It summarises the key issues. I suppose the main issue is that once the pandemic started, that the ability of the service to identify which customers it was providing a service to and being able to decide whether it was appropriate to charge those customers for the service provided, that system sort of broke down, and it's taken a lot of administrative work to try and catch up and to try and resolve some of those issues. So that issue around invoicing customers, which is identified as number 1 in the action plan, is probably the key issue. It has highlighted also there's issues about the sort of reconciliations between the waste service systems and other council systems, and the management of cash income, some of the operational procedures within the service as well needed to be improved. So I think those are probably the key areas. As I said in the introduction, the management within the service have recognised that improvements need to be made, and I think they've come up with a very constructive action plan. So they've taken the issues seriously, and they are addressing them.
Thank you. I've got Councillors Mason and then Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not sure who some of these questions are for, I suppose, but I'm happy for anyone to chip in. In terms of the amount of money that the report kind of identified we'd lost, obviously the pandemic's gone on longer. Do we think that amount will be the same for this year or less? And then the other one was just about cash and just how surprised I was that we took cash. And I just wondered, is that standard? Is that something that still happens in other authorities? And, you know, are we 100% sure that's definitely not happening? And have we got a kind of date that it definitely stopped by?
Yeah, I think we need to go to James and to Ben on that. Can I just ask Councillor Webb, do you have a question for Max before we go into the details in respect of this, which are on page 147 onwards?
Potentially one that Max might be able to address, but James, you might want to think about it. I suppose it's learning. I was going to ask James what the learning is from this, but then I suppose for Max, is this something that you're using as learning for audits in other departments? Are there other departments that you might now think, oh, we might want to flag that up? So I was wondering if there's any concerns for other areas of the council based on what we've seen here.
I don't think there's anything that we identified in this audit that suggests there's similar concerns elsewhere, but clearly some of the issues around the sort of efficiency of processes, the reliability of the completeness of data and records. Those are clearly issues that we often look at when we're doing audits, and we'll make judgments on. So the auditors, that sort of learning from the audit, that's something we apply generally anyway through our audit work.
Thank you. So I'm now going to ask James Gilchrist and Ben Grabham to join us. I don't know if Ben's on screen. Can you join us on screen if he's available? Fantastic. Yes, excellent. You've heard questions from Councillors Mason and Webb. If you could introduce yourselves, your titles, and then let's have a look at these things.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I'm James Gilchrist. I'm the Director of Environment, Transport and Planning. I'm joined by Ben Grabham, who's the Head of Environmental Services for the Council. So what I was going to do was just talk through some of the issues that have been raised, and then with Ben take any questions at the end. So firstly, I just wanted to thank Max and his team for the audit work they've done for us. And I think, coming to Councillor Mason's point, the waste audit was actually undertaken at my request when I discovered that we were still taking cash. The council made a resolution quite a while ago to stop taking cash, so I was quite surprised to discover this. So it was at that point that I actually asked for the audit. As Max has also acknowledged, we accept the findings, and as you can see from the actions we've agreed to, that Ben and the team are working on resolving the risks and issues that have been identified. As Max has alluded to, though, some of the findings do need to be put in the context of COVID. I think what happened was, under normal circumstances, if a business has a contract with the council and stops trading, the quarterly invoices that we issue stop being paid and we stop providing the service. Obviously, at the height of the pandemic and in response to COVID, the council was providing a broad range of support to businesses during the lockdowns to make sure that they survived during that sort of lockdown process. As a council, we generally don't charge if a service isn't delivered. So unlike in normal times when a business will not pay the invoice and therefore the service stops, what happened during COVID meant that whole bits of the city literally closed down overnight. The fluidity of those changes were significant and actually became very confused. Businesses were opening and closing several times in response to the COVID restrictions imposed by the government. However, even with the confusion of some businesses, we couldn't rely on the categories to say all hospitality is closed, for instance, because many of those businesses took the decision to not open when they could have opened under those restrictions. So it became a very confusing image of what businesses were doing out there. As you'll be aware, as a committee, those restrictions that the government imposed were both unpredictable and imposed at very short notice. So in essence, what happened was that COVID exposed our processes of businesses entering into contracts, our invoicing, our credit systems, our ability to respond at pace with the whole city opening and closing and keeping track of what businesses wanted, and it exposed that weakness. But I think the objective of ensuring businesses were not charged for services they did not receive was achieved. This was well received by businesses who are our customers. The report says that accounts had to be cancelled, and that's right in terms of the council not charging for work it's not done, which I talked about earlier. I think the context for that is that some private waste operators within the country continued to charge and held businesses to their contractual arrangements. And obviously we didn't do that as a council. As non-essential retail started to open, we established all those customers who wished to continue a service and issued an invoice, and obviously sought to identify the gaps of service who had received a service and not paid. And as Max alluded to, that was a significant piece of work. We've got a small team with a rudimentary IT system, which has actually served us pretty well in normal times as a lean model of operating that service. But managing those fluctuations and changes during COVID was difficult and exposed the weakness that has been found in the systems, as Max has identified. Most commercial operators do use bespoke IT systems and dedicated customer account and sales managers, and part of the review we've committed to in response to the audit will determine whether the council wishes to make this investment, increase the operational overheads to the service of running bespoke IT and those sort of sales managers. I don't doubt that in the confusion some errors were made, but the losses on commercial waste that are mentioned in the report would, I think, be largely better described as a reduction in income for work that was not undertaken due to COVID. That lost income did constitute part of our claim to government under the Sales Fees and Charges Compensation Scheme, and this funding has been received for 2021. Not only that, but the reduction in work that we did as a result of that allowed the service to redirect resource in line with the authority's emergency decisions at the height of COVID, which prioritised domestic waste collections. As we've alluded to in the actions, an integrated waste management system would remove some of the risks from the current ways of working, and we currently have a waste management system for residential waste and are talking to our supplier of that about their plans to develop a commercial waste module to that system, and that would almost certainly be the cheapest way for us to have a dedicated IT system for commercial waste. What we want to do is make sure that actually, when looking at that system, that it addresses the audit concerns that Max and his team have picked up. One minor bit at the end, the waste transfer notes should really be called waste duty of care notes, which businesses should have. And a waste management system would also help with that in terms of making the issuing of waste transfer notes automatic or a self-serve type system for businesses. But in the meantime, as the action plan notes, we've been transferring that process to business support to make sure those are issued in a more timely way. As I said at the beginning, we do accept the findings and are reviewing the invoicing process to improve it and working with business support to get critical documents out in a timely manner. The review of IT systems we will undertake and look at the various options that are available to us with that. I don't think there's much more I need to say, but I'm happy to take any questions, and I'm sure Ben, who has a more detailed knowledge of the service, will fill in my gaps in knowledge.
I've muted myself for a second there. Excuse me, Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, and thank you, James. And it's good to hear that the action's being taken already. That's reassuring. You said just then that there was an element of the loss of revenue actually being from not charging for a service that wasn't delivered rather than errors. Can we evidence that? And I suppose the follow-up to that, to Max, is that something that would have been taken into account in the audit?
I'll let Max respond first, but I'm pretty sure that the vast majority of that money is us not invoicing because businesses weren't operating.
Max.
Well, I think I've no reason to doubt that. I think obviously the audit was undertaken at a point in time. I think at that point there was still work ongoing, so it's possible that if we go back, we can provide a bit more reassurance in terms of what was actually income that wasn't collected because the service wasn't actually delivered, compared to income that should have been collected but wasn't.
I mean, in essence, I think it comes down to the fact that the vast majority of businesses were closed for a period of time. You know, there was non-essential retail was all closed. So
but James, it says in paragraph 3 on page 149, these customers were not being recorded on the finance system, creating potential discrepancies between the data held in waste and finance.
Yeah.
There's no exact split between the domestic and commercial waste collected. Although you're saying that, as far as you can tell, the vast majority of it wasn't. But if the processes and the data wasn't there, it's very hard to be able to determine to what extent that is. Is that correct?
I accept that point completely, Councillor Pavlovich. I'm not disputing that. All I'm saying is, as an authority, we generally don't charge people for a service they don't receive.
No.
The vast majority of the businesses in the city closed down for a period of time, therefore weren't producing waste, therefore we weren't collecting it. Trying to keep track of that as businesses were being told they could open, had they opened, with a team of two people was incredibly difficult, trying to track that across the whole city. I'm not trying to say anything other than we got ourselves in a mess over it and we didn't have the data to make those decisions easy. But I don't think we're saying we've lost 600, 700,000 pounds because we've not invoiced properly. I think we've lost a significant amount of money because businesses were closed and not presenting waste, therefore we were not charging them as part of our approach to supporting business. But that vast majority of that has been recovered through that government grant process.
Thank you. I've got Councillors Webb and then Councillor Mason. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, James and Ben, for coming along tonight. You know, this can't be fun for anyone. My question really is about, you know, I think what we're saying here is that the COVID-19 pandemic is, as in lots of areas, has highlighted failings in the system, and this is not unique to this particular aspect we're looking at tonight. This has happened in lots of areas, and James, you sparked my interest earlier on when you said that you were surprised that we were still taking cash payments, given the length of time since the resolution was passed to not take cash payments. And I suppose my point would be is what oversight was missing prior to COVID, prior to any hint of a pandemic, that meant that was still happening, so that when something did come down the line, it obviously caught us out. So what was the oversight and the management that was maybe not there, that you think we now need to put there?
Yeah, I suppose it's obviously the management oversight wasn't right, because we should have picked up sooner that happened, that practice was still happening. I suppose there are a number of ways of how we should be capturing that, one of which is within the service, how we as a service manage those teams. So, you know, that's one I will accept completely. The other element is is whether there's a way to, in the finance systems, to flag where we're getting cash. I don't know whether that's something that we can start to trawl the finance systems for. It's probably a question for Debbie about whether there's a way to capture, if we're getting regular, I don't know how it's logged in the finance systems, whether there's a way to capture where cash deposits are being made, and whether there's a way to track and pick up on those and challenge back.
Debbie, is that one that you can answer quickly, or?
Yeah, we do regularly look at cash, and it is an area that pre-COVID we did look at. Like James, I was unaware that cash was being taken in this area. So we will have another look at where cash is being banked, and I can do something on that.
And can I just ask a supplementary on just on the cash issue? And I'm still not quite clear, even from the reports, is how was this cash getting paid? Was it being paid at West offices, or was it being handed over to the waste delivery collectors? You know, were they having to wander around with big cash bags full of £5 notes?
It's happened before Ben's time, so I'll come in. No, it wasn't. It was neither of those, as it happens. It was actually one of the back office team going out and trying to be helpful to businesses who wanted more flexible payment terms, but obviously, you know, had overstepped the mark in terms of that. So that's why it was stopped.
No,
So it wasn't the crew collecting cash. It was the officer who
that's a
was the sales manager.
Thank you, Councillor Mason.
Thanks, Chair. Mine was just about that with the cash resolution. When was that, and when did we kind of clock on that we were still taking cash? Was it? I mean, you said it was obviously the audit was sparked by that, so I just wondered what the kind of timescales were between those two.
I can't answer when the motion or the resolution was off the top of my head. I don't know whether anybody else on the call can. I can tell you that I issued the instruction to stop collecting cash. I think it was in July 2019 from memory.
And this audit was done because we were still collecting cash. You didn't ask for the audit back in 19.
I think I did.
Okay, just took a long time.
Yeah, well, it paused because of COVID. Max might want to explain, but I think they started and then paused and picked it up again.
I think it mentions that.
Yeah, that's right. We did start the audit, but it was then obviously due to the pandemic we paused and then picked it up a few months later. So there was definitely a gap.
Yeah, definitely not collecting cash now.
No. So this, I mean, this report was relatively recent. It was 17th of December. Obviously, you had sight of the findings, Ben. I'm looking at you, Ben, in particular. So when did you with James implement these changes, and how long has that then been in place?
As I say, I mean, obviously we kind of received the initial findings from the report, and on the back of that, we I suppose have undertaken actions in relation to the report, but some of those were actually underway anyway. We've been looking at our commercial waste service, doing an exercise in relation to the pricing of the service, but also, I suppose, combining the learning of the wider waste service in terms of our domestic operations as well. So as an example to that, we have a waste management system for the domestic collections, and we're currently doing some work with the contractor in terms of that system and looking at whether or not we can introduce the trade module for that system. There is further work to do on that, because there's obviously a big piece of work that would need to happen with regards to integration into the finance and invoicing systems. So it is a kind of work in progress. What we have to do is ensure that the domestic side is working exactly as we want it to. We are making some significant progress with the developer, but we are not 100% satisfied with the system in relation to the domestic side. But on the back of that, we would then look at obviously the trade module. Having implemented a waste management system across a trade waste service at a previous authority, there is a lot of work involved in terms of making sure that the database is fully up to date, that it has all of the I suppose relevant nuances within the system that cover whether, you know, a customer wants a collection, you know, daily or perhaps sometimes twice a day, compared to those customers that may want the service once a fortnight, and obviously the number of bins within that. So there is a lot of integration that needs to happen. So we are investigating that, as is referenced in the report, and that will be something that we continue to do into 2022 or the latter part of 2022.
Marvellous, thank you. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. This seems to me to be a case of a service that has been going along for a long time, but hasn't been updated and made resilient for the challenges that the pandemic produced. And obviously, there is a risk that there could be further pandemics in the future and so on. Have we got a clear action plan to bring the service fully resilient, make it fully resilient, and make sure that these problems don't arise? And when will it be ready to come to members or the executive member for approval, please?
Well, I think the action plan makes it resilient to the risks that have been identified in the audit. I think, as with one of the actions in the audit, is to do a more fundamental review of commercial waste in terms of is it a service the council should be providing? Should we be doing it on a franchise model? So we've committed to do all of that work so that all the options can be presented to either the executive member or executive to consider the options that are there. So I think that option, I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head, but that option is in there. Sorry, not that option, that action is in there.
Right.
Yeah,
It's action 2.3, sorry.
Yeah, one of the things I'd probably add to that, Councillor Fisher, is that obviously one of the possible changes that may happen in the future is with regards to the government's waste and resources strategy, and there could well be some implications and some new statutory duties for businesses in relation to the management of their waste. So with regards to reviewing the service, it's not only important to look at what we're doing now, it's important to have one eye on the future and what might come out of that waste and resources strategy, which again, we should receive the next update of that very shortly. It was due out just after Christmas. There's been no update yet, but it is expected within the next few months. So I think it's important to obviously ascertain what may happen as a result of that strategy and then the impact potentially on the council's commercial waste operation.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave the meeting now. Thank you very much indeed, and have a good weekend, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, final question from me, and then we'll move on, is there are a number of agreed actions. Some of them were due to be completed by December, some of them by the end of the 31st of March, for both yourself, Ben, and for James. Do you envisage those being completed by those dates? And for Max, are we going to have sight of this update for the action plan sometime later on in the year, to your satisfaction, whether these action plans, agreed actions have been completed? So the agreed actions, are they going to be completed by the timeline identified in the audit? And are we going to look at it again at some time?
I'm going to sound like Little Britain now. Yes, but no, but yes, I think is my answer. The first one has been completed, I can confirm. So we have claimed that money from the government. The next one was around the back office processes, and we've certainly started that. Some of that might run over a little bit, but not significantly. I think the one that is most likely to overrun are the two around the tech one, or action 2.2. That one, I mean, it's always a case with IT, isn't it? But the system that we hoped would offer the solution, we're not in a position to present an option to members on that yet to say, we think this is something you should consider. And the ongoing review by the end of March, as I say, that kind of ties into it. So that will probably slip a little bit as well. But so those two at the end, I think, are probably the ones that will slip most.
Yeah, fine. Thank you. Well, listen, thank you. As Councillor Webb said earlier, it's never fun getting a grilling from any committee, never mind audit and governance. And thank you. You've been incredibly helpful and very forthcoming. Oh, sorry, Councillor Lomas, I missed your hand.
No, sorry. It was just a final thought that struck me. So apologies, I don't want to draw this out for you anymore. But and it might not be a question for you. I wonder if it's worth, in the spirit of always learning from things that go wrong in one place, to make sure that there aren't any other areas of council operations where somebody is trying to be helpful by taking cash. And you know, I don't know how that can be progressed, but we really do need to make sure that if that's the policy, and it's been policy since 2019, that we absolutely are sure now, in 2022, that it's definitely not happening. Because I have no idea how that would even be processed and accounted for. If we've got a policy not to take cash, I'm not still not convinced about what was happening with those banknotes that were being collected. How was that being processed? How is it being accounted for?
And banked. Debbie, I see, has put her hand up. I think it's more your territory, this, Debbie.
Yeah, what I'm going to do, Chair, is I'm going to get somebody to look at the income that is banked and just verify how much of that, if any, is actually cash, and then we can look at where cash. So predominantly cash comes from car parks, obviously that's the main source of cash, but I can look at any other areas that are banking cash and I can trace that back to see what is going on, if there are any areas. So that's the commitment. I think I mentioned earlier that I'll go in, I'll do that, and I'll initially speak to Max and Verito about any of those areas so that we can have a discussion about those areas, and then we can report that back either through one of the internal audit progress reports or just verbally at a future meeting.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. So yes, thank you very much. And we can move on, and we may revisit this at some time when Max gives us his regular updates on completed audits. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
So now we move to agenda item 6. Before I go on to agenda item 6, if anybody does need another comfort break, please just put something in the chat or ask. But we will try to get item 6 completed before we move, before we have another break. So this is the internal audit plan consultation process, and Max again.
Thank you, Chair. So we're at the stage of identifying areas to include in the internal audit programme of work for next year. As the committee will recall, we are now undertaking a continuous programme of internal audit work, which is flexible in nature and also closely aligned to the Council's risks. We will keep the programme under review and we'll prioritise audit work as the year progresses. We've also defined an assurance framework based on 11 key areas as listed in paragraph 6 of the report. So in delivering the work programme, we will also ensure that there's sufficient coverage of all those areas. And that's the reason we're doing that, is so that the annual opinion is not only based on the audit work we've done, but that you can place reliance upon it. So at this stage, we're inviting the sort of views and comments of the committee. So in the table in paragraph 9, we've listed the areas we are currently considering for inclusion in the work programme. As it says, it's not intended to be a complete or definitive list, but it's really to give the committee an indication of our current thinking. So we very welcome members' comments and suggestions. The work programme itself will be brought back to the committee for approval in April. And even when it's approved, it will, as I've mentioned, it will be kept under review. So if there are other areas that crop up during the year that the committee regard as a higher priority, then we can incorporate those. So again, happy to take questions, but also welcome any comments from the committee.
Some of these are incorporated into the table that we saw in the last agenda item, with the to-do, action now, next, and
yes,
later. Yeah.
It's essentially areas that we're identifying as a priority this year, which we can't do in the time available, will clearly drop into next year's programme.
Yeah, that's right. So, colleagues, Councillor Webb.
Absence management, I did remember it from what I said earlier on. I do think that that's something that it might be interesting to look at that as we come out of the pandemic. hopefully. That might be something that I know has been an ongoing concern for quite a while, I think pre-pandemic as well, so I think that'd be useful to look at. The other one that I think that's on your list is right at the end, the building services and housing repairs. I'd just really like to put a plug for putting that high up the list. I would prioritise that, as I think it's, you know, particularly in a ward like Heworth, where I'm a councillor, and that is a really, really big problem. And I think that that's something that I'd like to see a pair of eyes look over. So yeah, so for me, it would be housing repairs and timeliness of those repairs, and the process around how tenants are dealt with when they are in need of repairs. I think that's quite important. Thank you.
Thank you. Just on that table, which I think is the most relevant table, the table on paragraph 9, are there any areas that colleagues feel that Max hasn't covered? And then, if not, then we can start to talk about which ones we feel are the highest priority areas. I think you've covered quite a lot there, but that's not to say I haven't missed certain things that others thought, oh, that's a glaring omission. Now, so in which case, if Councillor Webb's already put his pitch in for housing repairs, which I certainly would agree with, I think there are a couple around public health, which is contract management of public health, and also the housing strategy and use of temporary accommodation and homelessness, and whether the resourcing that is going into that is best meeting the needs of that client group. I'm sure that Debbie and Janie and the other corporate managers would also identify their own priorities, but given that we do this every year, and we do highlight the areas that we feel perhaps need an audit, this is our opportunity to put a bid in. Councillor Webb.
Yeah, just reading through the list, this is nothing new, I'm sure, but both children's and adults social care, the budget, well, they're massively over budget, and I suppose there's a question there about budget management, and it's on the list, and again, for me, that's probably a priority. Thank you.
Any other bids, colleagues? No? Well, in which case, when we next, one issue that was raised was TECL companies. I think one of the public speakers raised TECL companies. And if you recall, it was something that we discussed, I think, at a previous meeting. I could be completely wrong on that, but I have a vague recollection that we did flag TECL companies up. Is there any plan on reviewing the governance arrangements of our TECL companies?
Okay, so SIPFA are meant to be producing some detailed guidance around the governance of TECL companies. That guidance, I think we were expecting it in the autumn. It hasn't quite arrived yet, so I expect it will come out fairly soon. Once we have that guidance, that will effectively provide us with the sort of framework to compare what currently happens in the council and through the shareholder committee and client arrangements for the council's TECL companies. I would just say there is a heading on the table called contract management and client arrangements.
Yeah.
So that work would fall within that heading. Now, what I think I've said in the past is that you know, we have looked at the client arrangements for make it York. That audit did identify issues. I wouldn't necessarily suggest we have to look at all the tackle companies, but we might want to look at some of them.
Yeah, great. So that could be added once the SIPFA template and guidance comes out.
That's right.
Yeah. So we next get this. We get this review. Is it on a quarterly basis? Just remind me, or is it a biannual?
So in terms of the program, we'll come back in April with the final.
Come back
version.
in April, right?
And then each progress report, we will update you on the work that is then planned to do.
And we have that a number of times during the year.
You do. So there's lots of opportunity to adjust the program as needs be.
Brilliant. No, that's really helpful. So if there aren't any further questions, thank you very much. We'll move on from that agenda item. Could I ask, it's been another hour since we had our last break. Would a 5-minute break, or would colleagues like a little bit longer? It's just I need the loo, so I'm taking chair's prerogative on this. 5 minutes, lovely. Thanks very much. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for your patience with that short break. Councillor Mason, I think we're just waiting on you to turn your screen on. Perfect. Excellent. Lovely. So we now move on to agenda item 7, which is another report from Max. This is the Counter Fraud Framework update.
Thank you, Chair. Each year we review and update the Council's fraud policy framework. We do this to ensure it reflects best practice, but also that it takes account of any changes in legislation. We also need to keep sort of one step ahead of the people who commit or attempt to commit fraud against the Council. So we are continually looking at the controls and policies the Council has in place to help ensure that. Annex 1 to the report provides a summary of the current environment in which the Council is operating. Unfortunately, we do have to recognise that local authorities generally and the wider public sector face an increasing threat of fraud. Cyber attacks, which we've talked about earlier, have increased. The COVID-19 pandemic and technological improvements have all just created new opportunities for people to commit fraud against the Council. So as well as updating the policy framework, we also refresh the counter fraud strategy and the fraud risk assessment each year. The strategy, action plan and fraud risk assessment together help us to inform and direct the programme of counter fraud work that we will undertake next year. So the updated fraud risk assessment, that's included in Appendix A within Annex 1, so on pages 84 to 93. We've given each of the service areas that are listed in the risk assessment a RAG rating based on the assessed fraud risk. And clearly counter fraud resources which we have available will be targeted towards the higher risk areas. Appendix P shows the strategic plan actions that we've completed last year, as well as a number of new actions which we aim to complete in the coming year. And these planned actions, they're a mix of service improvements and changes, as well as some specific project-related work. Finally, in respect to the policy framework, we have completed the review. No changes with the existing policies, but one thing we have identified that we think does require strengthening relates to this offering and acceptance of bribes. So whilst the Council has made reference to bribery in a number of policies and procedures, we think it's preferable to have a separate standalone anti-bribery policy. So we have drafted a new policy and appended it to the existing counter fraud and corruption policy. So that's attached as Appendix B to the counter fraud and corruption policy. The new bribery policy is attached to the report, so you can see it on pages 114 to 118. So we are asking the committee to provide any comments on that particular policy. So happy to take any questions. Clearly welcome comments on the new bribery policy as well.
Yes, thank you very much. And so just to confirm, that is a new policy. The others are just updated versions of existing policies.
Exactly. The only new bit is the bribery policy. We've had to make some very minor changes to the counter fraud and corruption policy just to reference it, but other than that, that's the only change.
Lovely, thank you. Are there any questions from colleagues? Councillor Lomas, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just looking at the counter fraud and corruption policy on page 101, paragraph 5.3 is about culture, and I think that's quite timely because I can't remember now if it was last meeting or the meeting before, we were talking about the culture of the council and issues that are perceived with the culture that have contributed to the PIR being issued, and that need to be addressed in the action plan. And this, obviously, as you say, it's just the existing policy, perhaps with some tweaks. But I wonder if there's something that needs to be done, perhaps in here, maybe not at this point, but maybe once the LGA peer work has been done, to further address issues of culture, because the counter fraud and corruption policy seems to be the place where you would put the statements about culture and about the culture of how the culture of the council will prevent particularly corruption from happening. So it's maybe not something that perhaps needs to be addressed right here, right now, but I just want to put a marker in that we return to this once we've got more information from that piece of work that's being done separately, to review whether actually is this section on culture enough, or do we need to add something to it?
Max?
Yeah, I'll note the comments. So yeah, we can reflect once we get the LGA peer review report and whether it's particular comments or recommendations around this, then obviously we can reflect that in the policy.
Thank you. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for this, Max. And I think it's clearly quite an omission that we didn't have a bribery policy previously. I'll be honest, I've not really ever looked at too many bribery policies, so I can't really tell you whether this is a good one or a bad one, but it seemed okay to me. On page 111, however, the fraud and corruption prosecution policy, at the bottom there, 4.5, exceptional circumstances. So this is in relation to mitigating factors and why we wouldn't necessarily prosecute someone for fraud. And the middle bullet point there says the prosecution would not be in the interests of the council. And I'm just trying to work out, when would we have a situation where not prosecuting someone who is defrauding the council be in the interests of the council?
Well, I think this, I know this particular element of the policy has been discussed at audit and governance in the past, and the answer I think I gave then and probably give now is that it's not a clause that we would normally expect to rely on, but there might just be the occasion, and it could be that the person we're looking to prosecute might have, for example, a terminal illness, and they probably don't have long to live. That might not actually reflect well on the council if it then pursued a prosecution.
Yes, and above there's a section on ill health or disability, and I get that bit. It's just that whole exceptional circumstances bit. It's obviously I get it. It's got to cover all circumstances, but it just does seem like, for me, it could almost do with a little bit more clarification, because there is the argument that prosecution will not be in the interest of the council is quite a broad statement and could be used inappropriately, is my only concern. But yeah, I'll leave that one there.
I mean, it's not designed as a way for the council to opt out. It's just to provide that flexibility in perhaps unanticipated circumstances where it's just not going to reflect well on the council to pursue a prosecution.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I have one in respect to the bribery policy. There's in paragraph 1.4, this policy should be read in conjunction with the employee code of conduct, which deals with gifts and hospitality. There's also the council code of conduct, of course. And should it not make reference to the council code of conduct as well?
Possibly. I'll take that's a good question. I'll take that one away, because we might.
Because there's training members of staff so that they're aware of the Bribery Act, and I'm just thinking that there could be some circumstances in which councillors might not be aware of what constitutes a bribe or a gift or an inducement, and I would have thought that in addition to giving all staff that type of training, it might be also beneficial for members, maybe as part of induction, or certainly now that we have this policy, certainly outlining its relevance to everybody that's connected or employed by the council.
Yes, I mean the policy is intended to cover both staff and elected members, as well as others. So yes, we'll take that one away, because I think that we might just need to change that paragraph.
Lovely, thank you. Are there any other questions? I mean, we've got a recommendation to note these. I should have mentioned that on the other agenda items, so apologies for that. If there aren't any other questions, then we do speak now, forever hold your peace. No, that's it. Thank you very much, Max. And I think that's the end of your many contributions this evening. And thank you so much for your time. It's always helpful when you're here. So yes, I shall let you go, and we'll then move to the final agenda item, which is agenda item 9. Which is the draft work plan. And you will see, colleagues, that it only goes up to the 6th of April. Why does it only go up to the 6th of April? I ask our colleagues.
Chair, it only goes up to the 6th of April because the corporate calendar for the new municipal year is still being developed.
Yeah. Therefore, we're just really looking at February's, March's, and the 6th of April.
Chair, if I may, there's one amendment to the work plan. So on the 9th of March, it's indicated that the limited assurance report on commercial waste would be presented, but it's been this evening instead.
Yes, correct. So thank you for that. So in February, as you know, even were we not to be going back to physical meetings, the next meeting would have to have been a physical meeting, because we have got to sign the accounts off, and that can only be done by ourselves. And we will also have, and I will just clarify with Debbie, that we now have the Mazars audit completion report and opinion document.
Yes, Chair, we do. We'll be bringing the accounts on the 2nd of February.
Yeah. Members may also be aware that the Constitution, the agenda item on the Constitution, was published yesterday. And on the agenda that was published, all the other agenda items say to follow, and that's because we very much wanted the Constitution to go early in order for members of the public to have the opportunity to make comment to us, and the rest of the agenda items will be published in the 7-day time period or that we statutorily have to follow. So unless there are any issues from the February, March and April's. Oh, Debbie.
Sorry, Chair. I just meant to add that the Treasury Management Strategy Statement also needs to come to the committee. And
what are you suggesting?
It will have to be March. That would be after it's been considered by full council, but obviously it's for your kind of scrutiny and review rather than decision making. So I don't think it's a problem unless you tell me otherwise, that it comes to you after it's been to full council.
Because it will have gone to full council at Budget Council. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
So Budget Council, I think, is the 22nd of February.
Week before this year, isn't it?
Yes, Chair. It's the 17th of February. Budget Council is the 17th of February this year.
Yeah. So that's fine.
Put that on for the 9th of March.
Put that on the 9th of March. And that will be absolutely copper bottomed the last time that we will be looking at the Constitution before it has to be published to go to full council on the 16th. I think it's the 16th of March, isn't it? Full council.
24th of March.
Oh God, I'm rubbish, aren't I? I can't remember a single date. I thought I had them off like that. 24th of March. So that is our last opportunity. Okie dokie. Well, if there are no other additions or removals of agenda items, then we shall move on from that. There is no urgent business, so I'd like to thank you all very, 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 very much for coming, and see you on the 2nd of Feb.